Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers, clean pocket, throws the middle of the end zone. Devonta, touchdown, and a dagger!
How's it going, and welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got some more Dynasty content centered around the rookie class of 2021, where today I'll be breaking down my top 10 fantasy football wide receivers for this year's rookie class. We'll be looking big picture and long term here in today's video, but we've also got plenty of information regarding redraft content and whatnot as well packed into today's video. So if you're new around here to the SFS channel, make sure to head down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on so you never miss a notification or an update when a video has gone live from us here at the SFS channel. And if you've been around here for a while, make sure to head over to our social media accounts and hit us up on there. We've got updates and instant alerts for when we've got stuff going live here on the YouTube channel or other important information that you should be aware of for our channel. So without further ado, thank you so much for tuning into today's video, and let's get started. Alrighty, as usual, and is consistent with the rest of my Rookie Dynasty rankings videos that I've been putting out on a position-by-position basis here over the last couple weeks, we're going in descending order here. So starting out with the number 10 player on my list, that of course being Amari Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers' new slot wide receiver. There's plenty of other names that I think could potentially be elevated into this spot throughout training camp in the offseason. But right now, Amari Rodgers is the player that I see in the best fit and best situation to find success early on and long term. Rodgers is in a spot right now where currently the thing that I think has the most impact on his fantasy production, that being Aaron Rodgers, is currently still placed in Green Bay and is currently still the quarterback of that football team. This is how I expect things to play out long term, and you might see the logo here on my sweatshirt. I am a Green Bay Packer fan, and at the end of the day, it's a bit annoying listening to all this Aaron Rodgers drama on a day-by-day basis. If he is moved, so be it. I think that, we got to be ready for anything as fantasy owners, and that's something that if you're an owner of a Devonta Adams or an Aaron Jones, you need to be prepared for that situation to happen and be prepared to have a backup plan in that scenario. But nonetheless, Amari Rodgers being a slot wide receiver, playing for one of the best quarterbacks in football at the current moment, I think is a highly advantageous situation. There's not too many other guys in that Green Bay Packers offense outside of a Devonta Adams at a pass catching position that's demanding too many targets or too much of the share of the targets there, where I think Amari Rodgers can come in and become a solid guy who sees targets on a consistent basis and is able to haul in receptions and put up a decent and valuable fantasy outing. I think Amari Rodgers is a solid wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 player at upside for the 2021 fantasy football season. If you're looking at this from a redraft perspective, I don't think he has too much draft day value immediately, and there are some obstacles that he has to be able to jump here to get into the lineup and on the field. Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Allen Lazard are currently the number 2 and 3 wide receivers for this team, and those are some bigger guys, so I think Amari Rodgers will definitely have a role, and with Matt LaFleur's creative play calling, I think he'll definitely find himself in the slot a fair share of the reps there in Green Bay. But there's a lot of question marks around Amari Rodgers this season. I don't think he's a guy that you should expect to come in day one and be an instant impact producer. But if he gets out there, I think his upside is a Randall Cobb in 2014 when he had a really productive season out of the slot playing for the Packers. And I think that between him and Aaron Rodgers, if that is the connection we see on day one, that can be a pretty prosperous combination for that quarterback and wide receiver duo. Then at my number 9 spot, I've got Terrace Marshall Jr., the new wide receiver headed to the Carolina Panthers, who was taken in the second round of the draft. I think Terrace Marshall, he plays a little bit more into the stylistic and body type that I would rather see out of a wide receiver as opposed to an Amari Rodgers. Slot receivers and shorter guys definitely have a role in fantasy football, and you'll even see quite a few guys a lot smaller than Terrace Marshall, higher than him on this list. But I think there's a lot of traits and a lot of strengths in his game that I really like to see from a wideout that I think will help him produce and translate into the NFL, especially from a fantasy perspective. Terrace Marshall plays the big slot role, and that's what he did at LSU, especially last season, being elevated into that number 1 spot on the football team with JaMarr Chase opting out. He really stepped up, and I think he's an underrated route runner. I don't think he gets enough credit for the work he does in that phase of his game, and I think that being a player of this stature, he's going to be a guy who can go downfield and make big catches for Sam Darnold and help him stretch the field and even be quite the red zone target as well. Like I said, a big slot target, but he still reminds me more of the mold of an X wide receiver or a wide receiver 1 than he does a wide receiver 2 or just a pure burner on the outside. I think Terrace can do a lot of things with this game, and being the youngest wide receiver on this football team with high-end draft capital invested into him, a second-round pick is a pretty substantial amount of draft capital put into a rookie wide receiver. I think that he's got good long-term value there in Carolina. Maybe year one, the thing that keeps him lower down on this list for me is that I don't think he gets in there and elevates himself above a Robbie Anderson or above a DJ Moore, but those guys have contracts that are expiring here in the short term. Now, they obviously could be extended. They obviously could see a longer tenure with the Panthers, but long-term, Terrace Marshall has a clean slate, 4 years, and a young quarterback to develop with. I really like this guy's talent, and I think if we're looking at rookie dynasty drafts, I'm looking at Terrace Marshall in the top half of the second round as a guy that I am very intrigued by with his skill set and situation with the Panthers. Then at number 8 here, I have Monroe St Brown. He gets a slight nudge for me over Terrace Marshall, not because I think that long-term he might be the better play, but if we're talking about in the present moment, I think he has a better floor day one than we see out of a Terrace Marshall, and I think that he's going to have a better opportunity to play immediately as opposed to a Terrace Marshall, or at least see more volume of targets and opportunities immediately than a Terrace Marshall. Monroe St Brown is coming into a Detroit Lions wide receiver core with virtually no long-term talent that they can really hang their hats on and say that this is our guy for the next 4 years. I think that's what Monroe St Brown is, and as a 4th round pick, it's not super high draft capital, and maybe there's some more high risk and investment here, but I think that at the end of the day, he's going to come in there day one, and I think that what the Lions are looking for St. Brown to be is sort of that Robert Woods factor that he was with the Rams when Jared Goff was his quarterback. We see Monroe St. Brown and Robert Woods, both players out of USC, and I think that they're going to do a lot of the same things as I mentioned. I think St. Brown's going to play a little bit in the wide receiver run game. I think they're going to run end arounds and jet sweeps with him at times. I don't think it'll be too heavy of a part of his game plan, but I think that Monroe St. Brown is also a guy who's going to be dependable, not necessarily make huge splash plays and make big high ceiling performances, but he's a guy that I think that could eventually develop into a solid 10, 11, 12 points per game player. Robert Woods, we saw him. He was a late bloomer, a late developer. But at the end of the day, where we've seen him develop to and come to at this point in his career is one of the more solid and dependable low-end wide receiver 1s or high-end wide receiver 2s in fantasy. So, Monroe St. Brown, don't expect a super high ceiling out of him, but I think eventually the floor will develop and be pretty darn solid for you. Then at my number 7 spot, I've got Kadarius Toney for the New York Giants. Similarly, but actually kind of flip the situation around, I think Kadarius Toney's a guy who might not see immediate splash impact and probably has quite a shaky floor as opposed to an Monroe St. Brown, but I think the sky's the limit for Kadarius Toney, and I think he has a crazy high ceiling. We heard Urban Meyer talk about it, how sad they were that he wasn't able to fall back to them at that 25th pick and that the Giants scooped him up before they were able to draft him. Kadarius Toney is such a versatile weapon. He's an offensive chess piece. You can use him as a runner in the rushing attack, or you can use him in a variety of ways, split out wide, in the slot. This guy is an athletic freak. The things that I saw him do at Florida, between him and Kyle Pitts, Kyle Trask had a very luxurious group to work with there, and Kadarius Toney, I think, will come to New York and hopefully be that same type player for Danny Dimes. But the thing that worries me is right now they've already got a solid and established top three players at the wide receiver position. Kenny Golladay is the clear-cut one there. There's really no argument or discussion to be made about it. He has the wide receiver 1 frame. He's made big plays throughout his career, and he's been a top-end fantasy producer multiple seasons during his time in Detroit. You look at the next guy down the list, Sterling Shepard. He's had some injury problems. He's been banged up a lot in his career, but he's another solid performer and a guy that I think they depend on there in New York to make plays at a given moment. And then a guy like Darius Slayton. He's their field stretcher. He's the guy that came in as a rookie with Daniel Jones. Both of them heading into year 3 right now, trying to make that next jump. I think that there's another role for him that's not just going to go away in this offense. So Kadarius Toney might have some waiting to do. He might not be a day one impact player, as a lot of these guys might not be towards the bottom end of this list. But at the end of the day, if given the shot and if he's able to translate, maybe refine up those routes a bit and develop as a pure wide receiver and put some of that talent into perfecting his skill set and becoming a more developed player, I think Kadarius Toney could be an absolute beast for Dynasty or redraft lineups in the near future. Then at number 6, I've got Rondale Moore, the wide receiver heading to the Arizona Cardinals, taken at the top of the second round of last week's draft. Rondale Moore is a stud. I think that this goes right along the lines of a Kyler Murray type player. Two smaller guys, and these guys are going to make fireworks happen. Rondale Moore is incredibly explosive. This is a guy that's going to stretch the field and do a lot of things after the catch as well. He's had some comps to a Tyreek Hill, as have other players in this draft class, like your Jaylen Waddles that you'll see a bit later. But I think this is going to work out really well for the two of them. Rondale Moore is not a wide receiver one, in my opinion, for an NFL franchise, but I think the production he provides could potentially get to that level for fantasy football. We don't have to worry about him coming into Arizona and being the wide receiver one for this team because they've already got DeAndre Hopkins. D-Hop, it's not up for discussion. He will be the alpha wide receiver in this receiving core, and we're going to see him get a heck of a lot of targets and opportunities to make plays with the football in his hands. But Larry Fitzgerald probably not going to be back next year. I don't think we've heard any word on that situation yet. Nonetheless, he's pretty darn old and he's getting up there in age. His effectiveness has been declining for the last few years now. And then you look at a Christian Kirk, who I don't think that they're necessarily too tied to long term. To me, Rondale Moore is the easy choice to insert himself into this offense, become a dynamic playmaker very early on, and grasp a hold of that wide receiver 2 position on that football team without too much effort and without too much difficulty. So I think he can be a pretty darn high upside play rather quickly as a Cardinal. Then at number 5, I've got Elijah Moore. There are some major things that question me or that I question about Elijah Moore and this Jets offense. There's 4 guys right now, and we don't necessarily know the order and who's going to be the starter day one. You've got Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder. I think I already said Corey Davis, but there's just a little bit of a cluster of players there, and you would sure hope that a second-round pick and a high one at that, and Elijah Moore is going to step in and probably take control of that slot position right away. But when you look at Jamison Crowder, who is probably their most productive wide receiver in that football team, in that locker room, that's the position he plays. He's not an outside guy. He's a pretty darn short player, as is Elijah Moore. So I think there might be a little bit of a learning curve here. Maybe we see Elijah Moore come in for different packages and skill sets right away, but I don't know if he starts and plays in 85, 90% of the snaps day one. Like I talked about with a lot of these guys, there is some development that has to take place here, and there is a level of getting integrated into this offense that I think is going to need to take place before we see some of these guys really take off, with the exception of the guys at the top of this list. Nonetheless, though, Elijah Moore is playing with a playmaking quarterback in Zach Wilson. I think that this is a great situation if you are Elijah Moore, because Zach Wilson is going to be the guy that slings the ball down the field, gets outside the pocket, makes ad-lib plays. That's going to play really well to Elijah Moore's skill set, and it's going to play really well to his fantasy value. I think that when you look at the Jets as well as a team that's going to be losing a lot of football games and going to be trailing, they're going to be passing the football. And what that means is more production, more opportunity for Elijah Moore. He's going to see a lot of targets and a lot of volume once he gets the chance to step in as the starter in this offense. And I think might even be the most talented player, or at least with the highest ceiling at this point in time over some other guys in that roster. So Elijah Moore, another player I'd be really excited about. Top half of the second round, as a lot of these guys are, maybe even creeping towards the back end of the first round. I think Elijah Moore is a pretty darn talented player that can produce some major points, maybe even some point in this fantasy season. Then at number 4, we're getting into some more higher end draft capital wide receivers. These next 4 guys all picked in the first round. Now, Rashod Bateman was the last of the bunch taken here, but the rest of these guys were all high second round picks. These are guys who have an even higher element of draft capital invested into their games, so we know that these teams have high expectations for them to come in day one, be instant impact players, and to put forth some solid football for these organizations, which will translate for us in fantasy. Rashod Bateman, if there's one knock I have on him right now, it's his landing spot. And I love Lamar Jackson. I think he can go out there and be a fantastic quarterback. And I'm not going to go out there and joke around and say that he's a running back when really this guy is actually a very talented quarterback. It's just plain and simple. This offense is a low passing volume offense. These guys want to pound the football. They want to run it with Lamar Jackson, play the option game, get J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards out there in space, making plays, and every once in a while they'll hit you with a big play action ball to Mark Andrews in the red zone or to Hollywood Brown over the top. I think Rashod Bateman comes in here and is finally that pure wide receiver they're looking for. I've comped him numerous times this offseason to Devonta Adams because of how crisp and pure of a route runner he is, but I just can't get over the fact that while I might really want to put him ahead of a Jaylen Waddle, the volume just isn't going to be there, and neither is the explosive element of his game that he's lacking, whereas Jaylen Waddle possesses. That's not to say Rashod Bateman can't go out there and win the deep ball. That's not to say that he can't go out there and score a 70-yard touchdown. That's just much more geared towards what Jaylen Waddle does well. Bateman is your 10 to 12 yards, do the dirty work, catch the football, get possession, and he's going to consistently find separation and consistently find catches. He's a guy who I would have loved to see go into a high passing volume offense because I think he could have been that Devonta Adams-esque and level of a fantasy player if he was in an offense that demanded that high of a volume out of their pass catchers. Now, that's not to say that the Ravens can't fall behind in a game and have to pass to catch up. This actually might be really beneficial to Lamar Jackson and might open up a new dynamic of this football team that they haven't been able to do before because they just haven't had the pass catching talent to do so. So maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe Rashod Bateman, we look back in 2 years and he has slid up the list here a couple of spots and maybe even pencils himself in at the number 2 fantasy wide receiver spot. I'm really high on him. I'm taking him in the first round of rookie dynasty drafts. I think the world of Rashod Bateman, and I would take a chance on him. I'm just not going to be quite too bullish on him because I don't want to too aggressively lead you towards drafting Rashod Bateman over one of the guys ahead on this list who might end up and I think has a safer chance of developing into one of these top 3 guys. So that being said, Jaylen Waddle is my number 3 player here. Again, not going to be a super high volume guy. Tua, I'm not so sure that he perfectly fits in his skill set. I would have rather seen a Devonta Smith here, but they opted to take a Jaylen Waddle over a Devonta Smith. I think Tua, what he really needs is just a crisp route runner, a guy who can find separation, and that's the critical thing. His receivers he has right now, Devontae Parker, Preston Williams. I've talked about this a lot throughout the offseason. They're jump ball physicality guys. They're not the players that are going to run elite routes and just win with separation and find space in numerous yards between themselves and the defender. That's what Jaylen Waddle does to some level. He's going to be a guy that flies past the defense. And Tua doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, but he played with Waddle in college, and he's going to be capable of getting that ball out there and giving him a chance to make big-time plays. Waddle, like I talked about with Rondale Moore earlier, he's a guy that's been comped to Tyreek Hill, a thick, shorter wide receiver who goes out there and makes huge plays in the passing game, great after the catch, super dynamic. I think he can take a lot of plays in the run game as well. Like I've talked about with a couple of these guys, that's something that we're seeing become more and more of a prominent phase of the National Football League and how coaches use their wide receivers. But nonetheless, I'm a really big fan of Jaylen Waddle and the talent he possesses. I think that he should see or result in Tua having a boost in his fantasy production. And I think at the end of the day, Jaylen Waddle will be pretty darn solid as well. He just doesn't quite have a perfect situation, which again keeps him below a guy like Devonta Smith here at my number 2 spot. Devonta Smith is the player who I see behind my number 1 guy, of course, having the highest potential, or I should say the lowest bust potential, because I think he has the highest week in and week out floor. Devonta Smith being the Heisman Trophy winner, we've seen him make crazy plays, be incredibly productive, and have multiple 200-yard receiving games. This guy is a stud, and you can toss out the weight argument. I myself have bashed on him. I have lobbied for Jaylen Waddle to be drafted ahead of Devonta Smith, which was the case at the end of the day. But I think the situations they've fallen into here and the skill sets that they possess with the teams that they've fallen to ultimately favor Devonta Smith as a fantasy player. The Eagles just don't have a wide receiver 1. They don't have a guy who they can count on to run the short, intermediate, and deep level routes. That's what Devonta Smith can do. This guy is going to be a playmaker. I've seen him run nearly every route in the tree at Alabama, and he's excelled at nearly all of them. I think he has some of the best comeback ability in the 10 to 12, even 15-yard hitch route game. He has the ability to stop on a dime. It's Stephon Diggs-esque, and when you talk about his slant routes as well, he is very proficient in that category of his routes as well. So I think Devonta Smith coming in here, playing with Jalen Hurts, another one of his former college quarterbacks, will come in a division with weaker defense in Dallas. You've also got the Giants as well. I think he can come out day one, produce really nice numbers, get a high target share, which is something that we haven't talked about too much with any of the other guys on this list. They've all got super high ceilings and the opportunity to produce really great numbers. Devonta Smith is in this first category where I really have a strong faith and ability or a belief that he will see 10 to 12 targets a game. Maybe he starts out somewhere lower between 7 and 8, but will expand upon that as the season goes on and become a very, very productive player for that offense. And then finally here at number 1, this one wasn't too hard to predict. JaMarr Chase is arguably the number 1 player in fantasy football in the rookie class. If you're looking from a dynasty perspective, I've got him at my number 1 or 2 spot. I pivot between him and Travis Etienne very frequently just because of the versatility and the dynamic playmaking I see out of both of these guys. Running back obviously being a bit more of a scarce position and harder to find guys at that spot that are elite level players. But nonetheless, JaMarr Chase is a stud. I think, like a Devonta Smith, these are the 2 guys in the class that I see getting that high-end volume and fancy upside day one. Joe Burrow, it's going to click. We see these players who are coming into situations in the NFL where they're playing with college quarterbacks, with their college quarterbacks more notably. This is something that I haven't seen over the last 3 to 5 years that I've been following fantasy super, super closely and doing in-depth research. This just doesn't happen. These guys already have formed a connection. These guys are already on the same page. It is absolutely going to happen that Joe Burrow is going to walk into Cincinnati day one, and he is going to sling the rock to JaMarr Chase more than any other player on that football field. It's just going to be what ends up happening, and it's going to be the reality for us here as fantasy players. JaMarr Chase's physicality, his route running, his elite athleticism in the open field, and his ability to just impose his will on defenders is going to elevate him above the rest of this pack for the wide receiver position. I think that at first my immediate impact reaction was I didn't love the pick because they already had T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. But the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized that the relationship that Burrow and Chase had in their days at LSU is going to translate. The reports have been that Joe Burrow was lobbying for JaMarr Chase to be picked over a Penei Sewell at that number 5 spot. So when your quarterback is vying for you to be the draft pick of your football team, I think you can expect them to try and use that guy out. So JaMarr Chase, I expect him to be incredibly productive, probably in his own class above the rest of these guys for 2021. And looking forward, I think that JaMarr Chase is going to be an absolute demon for other fantasy teams to try and have to line up against each week. Alrighty, there you have it. Those are my top 10 wide receivers for Dynasty Fantasy Football coming out of this rookie draft class of 2021, as we have recently figured out all of the landing spots following that NFL draft. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to head down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on as well so you never miss a football style video from me here on the channel. Also, like I talked about at the beginning, if you haven't done so, check out those social medias at the top left-hand corner of your screen and go check us out on sizzlefantasy.com, which is where we put out even more content and offer more exclusive and in-depth analysis for your fantasy football needs. So thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace out.